Well, Lynn, several questions have come in related to Glass-Steagall and economics, so it's difficult to choose which to go with. But I want to, given what you just discussed, I want to follow up with a question on parity and economics in the reinstated Glass-Steagall world. This question comes from Dave Christie, a member of the policy committee who is in Eastern Washington working with a number of farmers and agriculturalists out there. And he said that farmers are obviously no fans of Wall Street, by and large, and that they feel that they're no longer working to produce food, but that they're working to produce a profit, that they're working for banks. He says they feel as though the culture has been taken out of agriculture, and it's now an agribusiness. Now, parity is a simple concept that farmers receive a price for their product that pays for the investment they have to make into producing it, as well as for the necessity of the upshifts that are needed for the future. So, since parity is becoming a more difficult concept for people to understand nowadays, he's asking, when Wall Street gets wiped out with the new Glass-Steagall, and many of these inflated values come down as that occurs, how do we establish a new sense of value? From a study of your economic theory, it is clear that true value lies in increasing power, measured from the standpoint of energy flux density. But in terms of setting a relatively fair pricing system, it would be good to start with a very crucial point of production, namely food. That might be a good starting point to reconfigure a sense of value. So the question is, would parity have a role in determining a new sense of value when Wall Street's paper is dissolved after Glass-Steagall is brought back?
This requires a little bit more explanation, which I was trying to hold back away from at this point. All right. The question of value. What we do, well, let's put it this way. What's the difference between man and a monkey? Man and a baboon, man and an ape. What's the difference? Well, the monkey, the man eats, and so forth. The man actually uses fire. The difference between man and an ape is fire, the use of fire. Now, somewhere way deep in Africa, which is our best information on this sort of thing, there were people, monkeys or baboons or gorilla-like creatures, ape-like creatures. And they were living there. But then you had a similar kind of culture at first glance, what you see from the remains of these places. And you find that man uses fire. Mankind is the only animal that uses fire. There's more to it than that. Because the history of mankind is we start with simple fire, which is the way civilization begins. And it goes through various stages of development to higher and higher levels of skill. It can be generally expressed in terms of power, energy, fire. The fire gets hotter and hotter per capita as you go along, which is that mankind progresses. Mankind, who is simply an ape or an ape-like creature in South Africa, at one point now becomes several orders of magnitude something new, something fresh. Creative, builds systems. Generally, the increase in the intensity of fire as a part of the whole business of human existence is crucial. Now, what has happened now is that up until the time of the assassination of our great president, that up to that point, we in the United States had, with ebbs and flows, we had periods, bad periods, where the people were oppressed, exploited, and so forth, and times when we were actually productive. And the productive periods were significant. So what has happened, we have, as humanity has with ebbs and starts, that we have either slowed down and become backward, or we have increased our technology, we've increased our intellectual powers, and so forth. And the United States actually saved civilization, because what was done by the landing of the Pilgrims in Massachusetts, for example, was crucial, because what happened, this forced the development of Massachusetts, for example, forced the development of economy in North America. Whereas in Europe at that time, the pressure was on to keep suppressing the population. In other words, people would become richer, relatively speaking, and then someone would say, this is no good. These guys we're eating too much, there are too many of them, and so forth. We have to cut the population, we've got to cut their standard of living. And this was the characteristic of man's life in old Europe. What happened with the Columbus voyage, which was organized by Nicholas of Cusa, who was the genius who designed this whole system, he recognized that there had been this recurrent pattern of degeneration of European civilization, for example, as well as other parts of the world, and recognized that there were cycles which are based on the oligarchical system, because it was a system in which the majority of the population was kept in virtual semi-slavery, and a few people who were the so-called wealthy and powerful dominated the scene. And the Roman Empire, for example, it became a monster of power, and then it suddenly was collapsed. And the Roman oligarchy got up there to the north end of the Adriatic Sea, living in a mud pile for a while, and gradually came back, but they were the original Roman imperial class. Same thing happened again and again in the history of Europe in particular. And therefore we have a pattern which was not only, it happened in the Far East as well. You had complete wipeouts of cultures through collapse processes because the oligarchy was opposing the increase of the standard of living. They wanted fewer people all the time. They wanted to build up something as a power, then it would get too wealthy. And people would get a sense of strength, challenge the oligarchy. And so, like as with the Roman Empire's collapse, the empire would collapse for a while. And then a new empire would come out. Now what happened was that Cusa, who was well informed on this, said this is the solution is that we've got to take people from Europe and have them move away from Europe across the great oceans and build up a new civilization to re-inspire, not only for one time more, but as a continuing process to a more productive human species and a better society. So what happened was that the landings in North America, in particular, there were attempts in South and Central America, but they didn't work out so much because the Spanish system, which was a dominant one, had made a mess of things. But so we understood that. We understood what this was. And because we, especially in the area of Massachusetts and joining areas, we set into motion a higher standard of productivity than had been known before. You take the Massachusetts Bay Colony, when it went into its great phase of growth, the economy, the economics, and technology of the Massachusetts Bay Colony was superior to that of Europe. So the fact that we had this tension between the Americas and Europe on this particular account meant that Europe was out to try to crush the North American civilization in particular. And the North American civilization was fighting back. But the fact is that the effectiveness of the fact that the more intelligent people, effectively intelligent people, would tend to be in the Americas. You'd have a similar kind of thing in Canada. And you'd have similar developments like echoing this in South and Central America. And the problem was always the European powers, which represented, well, usually about 40% or 50% of the wealth of the world, and the people of the world, that they were always fighting back to try to crush this American development. And the fights were always, for example, the first thing the British did, actually the British were actually Dutch, and it was the Dutch bums who invaded England and brought their system, they called the British system, into existence in the British Isles as well. So you had this fight with the imperialist part in Europe as opposed to the productive part of those nations in the Americas. So all the way through, there was been a fight between, on the one side, the American and similar kinds of things, like countries in South America and so forth, that developed. And they were developed in contrast, in competition with the European oligarchical system. And then you had people in Europe, such as Bismarck, for example, in the course of the 19th century, who were actually fighting for the same purpose. So you had a tension inside Europe. You had people on the European side who wanted the same things that the Americans did, for example. And so therefore the point was the British Empire had a problem, which is the original Dutch Empire already. And so therefore the intention was to crush this American and similar kinds of developments in the transatlantic region. And what we are now at the tail end of an attempt to crush out of existence, what the Americas has represented, crush it out of existence, and use the crushing of the America to impoverish and do the same kind of dirties to the European population. And Wall Street is the expression. Now, Wall Street was a creation brought into the United States, even earlier than the United States was formed, was brought into North America. And these bankers, who were British bankers, controlled the area of New York City, for example, controlled the Boston bankers, controlled other things. And so these parasites from the inside would often, the British interest and these parasites would create presidents. The presidents were scumbags, to use a polite term. Their intentions were evil. And this happened recurrently. Then we would have presidents and governments in the United States which were of our liking, of our tradition. But you had at the same time, coming in from Europe, you had these swarms of parasites, evil parasites who were out to gobble us up. And what happened is, with the assassination of John Kennedy, that the turn in the United States has gone down permanently ever since. The assassination of Kennedy was the fulcrum for bringing the United States into destruction. The next crucial turn from that point on was what happened when Bill Clinton made a mistake, and which he would probably tell you today it was a mistake, of canceling Glass-Steagall. And the cancellation of Glass-Steagall and the process leading into that cancellation, as we went down, every step we went down. We in the United States, from the time that Kennedy died, we went down. Everything became worse. And that's why Kennedy was killed, because he was an obstacle to the British policy. And as long as he kept his policy going, the Americans were going to win. So they assassinated him. Then they assassinated his brother. And in the meantime, they started a war which Kennedy would not have allowed and others would not have allowed. A war in Indochina. There was no reason for allowing that war in Indochina to have happened. None. But this is how we were undermined and destroyed. And the worst of it was the minds of our own people were destroyed. Because being our own people and considering themselves as underdogs and showing respect for the overdogs or whatever else they were, this is what happened to us. And so therefore our struggle now is to get our republic back. That's simple. We are going to take our republic back and kick these bums out of there. We're going to have our nation back again. And that's what this is all about. The other side of the thing is, how do we do it? Well, simply, humanity has always depended on scientific progress, or whatever scientific progress means. That's been the basis for the progress of the human species since from the beginning. Since the time in South Africa that somebody was using fire to cook their food rather than raw. And that's been the fight all the way through ancient times. And the same thing is true today. We don't have to worry about some things that other people would like to make problems. All we have to do is get back to our American tradition. Our technology, increased energy flux density, from step to step to step, always march upward. We're going next to the stage of thermonuclear fusion because we cannot manage the problems of the planet without introducing the factor of thermonuclear fusion. The green policy is a policy of mass murder by suggestion. By telling people it's good to be green, they're committing murder against their own people. Because the effect of going green is to mass murder of our population. And our job here is to get our nation back, our republic back, according to our Constitution, original Constitution, which is perfectly fine today. It has features now, which technology has changed, and features of what it was before have been outmoded. But they're still the same principle. The principle is that man, starting from a fire user in South Africa, cooking his food, had made a revolution. And instead of having animals, we had human beings. Animals might have liked to do what we do, but they didn't come with the equipment to do it. The way we do that is we help the animals, either because we like their companionship or because they're important to us for our food and so forth, and other reasons. And so that is the story that has to be told. The usual explanation, the wise guy who comes along with a couple of quick explanations, is a fool. Most people are fools, not because they intend to be fools, but because they're encouraged to be foolish. By believing in this and believing in that, which are all fakery, all fraud. And that's where the issue lies. And therefore, my concern, I have a clear conception of what this Glass-Steagall means. It's no different. What I believe is no different from what Franklin Roosevelt believed. It's no different than what the founders of the nation believed. But the point is, that is us. We are not going to sell ourselves out again. This is our system. It's a system we created, or our predecessors created, in creating what became known as the American system, which is the greatest system ever invented on this planet, right? At least for modern times. But it's been struggling against something at its throat. Well, we call it the British Empire. It's actually the Dutch Empire, but the name doesn't make that much. And the time has come to get those bastards off our back and get back to rebuilding the nation which we fought for, which we tried to build, and which is ours. And it's ours not to be a predator on the rest of the species, but to give to other people the sense of the same kind of freedom and the same kind of progress that we want. And that's the way to explain this thing, not all the gibberish put at one side. What's necessary is you have to have the know-how to make this work. Well, I have the know-how. And we have other people in this country who have the know-how. We just got to pull ourselves together and make sure that this country gets the benefit, that benefit now, because it's too late for us to fool around with this anymore.